small farm growers that I work with, and I want to give a caveat here today. We probably got some backyard growers online. This is more kind of focused for growing garlic for market, but in reality, you just scale it down for a backyard. So all the things I'm going to talk about, other than some marketing things, are going to be relevant for the small grower too. Let's talk about growing garlic. Just some real fast facts here. You might have heard of Gilroy, California. That's the garlic capital of the world. I'm not going to read all of these, but one thing I did want you to note is in the third item there, we see that 18% of Americans consume at least one food containing garlic every day. That actually exceeds how many French fries are eaten as a percent in the United States. So you can see there's a huge market out there, not only for just the garlic that's consumed as a food source, but there are medicinal marketing opportunities for this crop too. And then likewise, to indicate the demand, the United States is the world's largest importer of garlic. So like I said, there's a lot of opportunity for growers out there. As I indicated earlier, I'm a small farms educator with the U of I Extension and work with small farm growers that are growing garlic for market or are looking at getting into that. I'm a grower myself, and I grow a lot of garlic myself. So I'm going to give you a mix today of some of the extension side of it and some as a practical grower and what have you, and we'll mix that as we go along. I talk with these growers, why is so much interest in garlic? Across the board, they'll tell you that garlic there with potatoes and tomatoes is one of the mainstays of their small farm operations. And the beauty of garlic is a storage crop. So if you have, for instance, a CSA, a Community Supported Agriculture Program, garlic is one that you can market to the people through the year. And you're able to keep communication with them and market products to them. Everyone eats garlic, so if they eat it, we grow it. One of my learned growers that I learn a lot from has told me you grow what you can sell, and garlic is something you can sell. The other things about it is the scapes. We're going to talk about scapes a little later. There's so much of the product that you can sell throughout the season, so it's a very useful product, and it's fun and easy to grow. So just some background so we're all on the same page. Garlic is a long season overwintered crop, so we're going to plant it in the late fall and harvest it in the dog days of summer, July. And what happens is basically the cloves root early in the season. We'll talk about that a little later on, how much growth we want. And then they'll go through a chill requirement, and then that's when they basically separate into cloves. And then early spring, they separate into cloves, and a lot of the growth that we need begins to happen. So that's kind of a year in the life of garlic. Garlic culture. Garlic is very responsive to the environment in positive and negative ways. And for instance, the negative way, you won't be very successful growing garlic in areas that are high moisture, clay type soils. It just doesn't do well because it is a root crop and you'll have the tendency for rotting. Different cultivars will do well in certain areas, and you kind of need to experiment. I'll give you some ideas based on trials that the University of Illinois has conducted across the state of some varieties, but you need to play around. Let's go on with the terminology. The garlic that we grow in this part of the country in Illinois is hardneck variety. The varieties that you will buy in an average store that you go around Illinois will quite typically be a soft neck variety from like California, Florida, or the Southeast. We don't grow soft neck variety to speak of in this part of the country because it's not nearly winter hardy as the hardneck varieties. You'll often hear hardneck varieties called top set. And that's what they mean by that is the stalk stays upright for almost all of the growing season. The soft neck varieties, the stalk falls over. So if you're going to get in the garlic business, don't buy your garlic from the store and bring it home and plant it. You need to get the hardneck varieties. We have the clove and the bulb, and the best way to talk about that is on our next screen. Hardneck varieties, the most commonly one grown in Illinois. Like I said, they're very cold tolerant. We have on this diagram the scape, and that's a marketable product. We'll talk about it in a little bit and how and when you market that. And then leaves, and then the bulb at the bottom. And very cold tolerant of the hardneck varieties, so that's why we utilize those. Back to the terminology a little bit. So we have the bulb or the head, and then when you break the head down into the individual parts, usually 5 or 6 on a head or a bulb, you have the cloves. The cloves are what we actually end up planting when we plant the garlic in the field. And then on the right-hand side, you see a picture of the scape as it's getting pretty mature, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But that's some of the terminology so we can keep that straight. So here in this picture, we've got a picture of the hardneck variety. So this was a clove that was planted probably the last week of October. This photo is in late June, and as you can see on this photo, it's a hardneck variety. It's standing straight and erect, and the lower leaves are starting to mature. The leaves, as they start to dry and drop off, are an indication of how close you're getting to harvest. And as you can see in this photo, it was late June, so that plant is getting ready to be done. Now, you'll also note on this picture, there's the scape on the top of it. Looks like it's curled over, and you can see there's no, what I'm going to call seed head. It's actually not a seed. But you can see that scape has been cut. The seed head has been cut off, and the reason we do that is you want the energy from the plant going into the bulb itself, so you have a nice large size marketable bulb, instead of going in to form seed heads. And you'll find that if you don't cut that scape off and that seed head, that you have a significantly smaller bulb that you're going to market. If you're striving to grow good garlic in Illinois, that's a picture of a really healthy, productive plant right there. Okay, just a little bit more information about this seed head, which is actually called a bulbil. And you can plant them, and these are examples of planting that seed head. For instance, if someone might have forgot to cut one of the scapes and it produced that bulbil, you can take those out and plant them, but you can see here already, this photo was taken at the same time, everything planted the same. It's a very, very small head, not really marketable. If you're growing the garlic for market, there's not many people who would probably want to buy that. So that was kind of an experiment there to show you what it's like. Now, if you just want it for your own use, they're nice to cook with. About one of the bulbs will be used whole instead of just one clove from a regular sized garlic. So there's a regular sized garlic. That's kind of the goal of what we're getting to, and that's been cured and ready just to be cleaned up a little bit. And we'll talk about that, how much you clean those up a little later. But that's kind of what we're striving for. Just a real quick slide on the bulbils. You want to make sure that you cut those scapes that I talked about as soon as that starts to curl, and it'll curl around like a curlicue if you just left it growing, and then as it starts to form the seed head, it'll straighten up. But you want to go out there, and in Illinois, let's say you planted your garlic the end of October, the 1st of June probably is when you want to get out there, right as those scapes start to turn and curl, and that's when you cut those off. If you're a grower and you're selling, the scapes are really attractive to sell. People look forward to those at farmers market and your CSA customers because they're really nice to cook with. And generally what people do is they chop those up for stir fries, or you can grind those up in a food processor with olive oil and then freeze them in little tablespoon-sized batches, and then you can use those for cooking whenever you want. But if you're growing it for market, you want to get those scapes cut off so you're not putting all that energy into the seed head and it's all going into the bulb. Here's just another quick picture that we took showing some of the things that we had here about the planting that small bulbil. And this is a year later, but if you kept planting those like that, it would take you a long time to get up the size of a marketable bulb like we would see on the right-hand side. So here's another picture of that hardneck variety doing well, late June. You can see at the top of the picture, they've got the seed head or the bulbil cut off. Once again, that's kind of a picture of what you're striving for if you're growing garlic here in Illinois. Another close-up of that bulbil forming, and the reason I have so many pictures of those in here is I want to make sure that everybody remembers it's just an essential part of growing garlic to get those cut off, so we're putting the energy in the bulb and have a really nice marketable product. And this is actually a pretty mature one because you can see the seed head is mature and the scape is starting to straighten out. So some of the unique requirements of garlic versus some of the other crops that you might grow. Garlic obviously has an internal chill requirement, so what that basically means, in order for that one clove that you plant in the field in October, it needs to go through some physiological, chemical, hormonal changes that are brought forth going through a chill requirement and a certain temperature in the ground. I'm just going to catch up on one question. How far down do you cut the scape? Basically, that's not a real big rule of thumb. Just make sure you get that curl cut off. So where the curl ends, you can cut it off there. So on the chill requirement, now I get asked a lot of times, well, can it go through a chill requirement if it's not in the ground and you use a freezer or something like that? And that's a hard question to answer. But I basically answer it, there's a hormonal change, remember, that I talked about, and that really needs to take place in the ground after it's established its root system and has been doing the things that it's supposed to do prior to a hard freeze in the ground. So if you're going to be serious about growing garlic, get it in the ground at the right time and let it go through the chill requirement there. So the chill requirement is going to take that individual clove and it's going to let it multiply into those 5 or 6 cloves that you're going to get in one big head of garlic. So it's very, very important. So let's move on a little bit to the planting. We want to get that in the fall. I'll talk a little bit about some dates in a minute, but we want to get good root growth, but we don't want a lot of top growth. So typically in Illinois, we'd be looking at late September through, it's hard to say. I try to have all of our garlic planted at the research farm the last week of October. Now, there are people that get by going later, but what happens is we don't know what the weather's going to be doing in late November, December, and you might not get enough time to get that root mass developed. And that's what you're trying to achieve before there's a hard freeze out there. You want a good solid root mass that's going to help that plant really survive and produce a big bulb later on. You don't use seed. I use the term seed head every now and then. We talked about that earlier, but you're using the individual cloves. I do want to make a note that I have seen before is if you're going to save garlic to plant, which is commonly done, you save your biggest, healthiest bulbs for planting because the bigger the bulb, the bigger the clove that you use, the bigger bulb you'll have on the flip side. But one thing about that, if you're going to do that, make sure it's cured properly and that you aren't separating those cloves from the bulb until right when you're in the field there ready to plant, because they'll dry out and you can get some disease issues and what have you. So just bring your whole big box of bulbs out there and get your kids, your family, your interns, whoever you have to help separate those right before you plant. So the timing for fall planting is very important. There's going to be a range here, but I wouldn't go any earlier than late September, and I'm talking towards the end of the last week of September in Illinois. All the way through the end of October is going to be ideal. If you went earlier in September, you get way too much of that top growth, and that's not what we want because that top growth will winter kill and cause a lot of issues. But on the flip side, if you go mid-December, you're not going to get any root growth at all, and probably that clove is going to sit there and rot, and you're not going to have anything at the end of the year. So you can see there on the bottom, you want about 6 to 8 weeks of growth before the ground freezes. So that's not necessarily the first frost because the ground freezing will be later than that. 6 to 8 weeks is kind of an idea. And I think in the next slide here, just to give you an idea across the state of when we have that first 32-degree ambient temperature freeze, that's not, one-to-one correlated with, we can say 2 weeks after that we have a hard freeze. I just wanted to show you this so you have an idea of when those temperatures begin to really start to change. Soil requirements. Garlic does really well in high organic matter soils. So if you're one that's going to grow in a lighter organic matter soil, you want to make sure you amend that with compost and what have you. And if you're growing in a low organic matter soil or a sandy soil, you've probably been doing that all along if you're growing anything. So high organic matter, garlic really likes it. A key to it is the good drainage. Because it's a root crop, a bulb crop, it doesn't like wet conditions. You'll get a lot of rot. You'll get rot over the winter time period, so drainage is very, very important. So it's pretty straightforward for most plantings, 1 to 2 pounds of 10-10-10, 100 square feet. Do your soil test to check. May not need anything at all, but you need to have some soil tests for that. It doesn't have huge requirements for fertility, but obviously we need to have what it's going to take out in the soil. Planting. So from here on out, as we talk, I'm going to give you general ways things are done, because if we interviewed 5 growers I work with that plant garlic, we would have 6 different ways that they do things. So I'm just going to cover a number of things general. You can really modify these based on how you want to grow, and you'll be successful. So planting, a dibble planter, water wheel, hand planting, and a single shank ripper are the majority of the ways that these are planted. And I'll talk to you a little bit about row space, but it's pretty variable. The picture on the left does show that's way too close. That's about 4 inches, and we're talking should probably be closer to a foot. So that's way too tight to have those planted. But whatever approach you use, as I note in this screen here, make sure it's just about 3 or 4 inches deep. Deeper is not better with these. You can cause a lot of issues and heartache for yourself if you go too deep. So stick to that 3 to 4 inches. A small plot, I said 14, 15 to 18, it's going to vary a little bit between rows. And what you'll do is you'll separate those individual cloves from the main bulb that I talked about. And we generally, as a rule across the board, no matter how we're planting them, we go 6 inches with the varieties that we use in research at Monmouth and with cooperators. And that seems to work really well. And just another note to remind everybody, make sure you're not separating those cloves from the bulbs until right out there in the field to keep them as fresh as you can. And then the trend with growers that I work with is a lot of them are going to 30-inch, 38-inch rows between rows and then 6-inch spacing within the row. And the reason for that is they can use some of their mechanized equipment that's already set up for that row spacing. If they need to do various activities, they can do it mechanically for weed control or whatever it might be. But that's certainly the trend with the commercial growers, well, a lot of the commercial growers I work with. I mentioned this a little earlier. As a general rule, larger the clove, the larger the bulb will be at harvest. So when you harvest these bulbs every year, you pull off the top 10, 20% of the largest size bulbs, because those are the ones that you're going to want to keep for seed stock for next year. So that's what we're using. So we get out there to plant. You want to make just straightforward things. Make sure that you're planted with the tip up and 3 to 4 inches below the soil surface. If you don't place these correctly in a seed bed, you end up with misshapen stalks and this product that's unmarketable. And that really becomes a consideration with planting systems where you don't have any control of the clove all the way until it's embedded in the furrow. So you might go on YouTube and see some of these videos of people planting and they're just holding 20, 30 cloves in their hand and they go along with a planter or a water wheel and they just drop it in. If a commercial grower was going to do that, they would have to plant a significantly increased number of cloves because a lot of those are going to be upside down in the seed bed. They're not going to be placed well and they're not going to grow. Weed control. Garlic doesn't do well with weeds. That's one of the reasons that we like to have mulch on that. I'm going to mention a little bit more about mulch in a little bit, but it doesn't do well with weeds at all. So we can mulch it with straw or other organic material after planting. On planting 3 to 4 inches, that's from the base of the clove on planting that when you put it in the row. So you want to make sure you mulch that. I'm going to talk to you about some experiments, some trials that we're doing at the research farm and around the state that I think really have promise. The other way that people do it are with commercial people. They use large round bales of straw. But let's talk real quickly about this interseeding into cover crop. And this is what we're doing in research trials across the state. And so we're using oats as a cover crop. And what we do is we plant the oats by August 15th. Well, one more slide here. Let's talk a little about the mulch, and I'll tell you about the trials. Removing mulch, I have a question mark there because, once again, if you ask 10 people, you get 11 answers on this if you remove the mulch in the spring. My professional opinion, and as a grower, is you need to remove that mulch once the plant starts growing in the spring. It can be on pretty heavy all through the winter to keep it from winter kill and a number of things. But you need to get the mulch off of the plant so it can get air. If you don't get the mulch off of that, what happens is you end up, your stalk starts to decay and it gets various pathogens and diseases, and it just really hurts production. But the nice thing about removing mulch off of the rows is you just move that mulch over in between the rows, and that's what's going to be your weed control for the year. And then that will help hold moisture in, and it does a number of things. This is a note for the Illinois people listening. I can't speak about other states, but basically in Illinois, I-72 and south, you may not need mulch for frost protection like we would in northern Illinois. The plots that Dr. Voigt works on in Champaign don't use any mulch at all, and they don't have serious winter kill at all. So if you're Champaign south, you probably wouldn't need mulch for frost protection, but as I note on the bottom of this slide, any site's going to really benefit from mulch regarding weed control and how it uses water. The large round bale on the right, bottom right of the picture here just shows a lot of the commercial people set up their rows on spacings where there's 2 rows the same width as the bale, and they cut the bale and they roll the bale down the entire width of the row, and that's what they use for spacing. It's just kind of an easy way to do it. Not sure if any of you are backyard people, you'll be doing that. So here's part of our trial I was talking about. And what we're doing is we're growing a living cover crop that will winter kill instead of using a purchased straw mulch. So we use oats because they do create a lot of biomass and above ground growth, and they will winter kill. So we don't need to come in there with any sort of a chemical to kill them later on. This is a picture of our trial at Monmouth, and it's kind of hard to tell by this picture, but the yellow flag and the green flag are both different rates of oats that we have seeded. This is a single shank ripper that we use in the trials that we do that works very, very well. And basically, we go down through these rows. I'll have a picture of it in a minute, and we rip the row to a certain depth. We were just getting started on the row here. You wouldn't nearly go that deep. But we rip a single row down through there with that ripper, and it really doesn't do anything to the cover on the top, and then it makes a nice seed bed for us to plant into. The way this progresses, in this picture here on the left-hand side, that's straw, so that's one of our controls that we have in there. People have grown straw for many, many years. In the middle here, it shows the oats. I don't know if it's the high rate or the low rate, but basically this is the morning of the first frost that we had. And I don't have it in front of me when the first frost was that we took this picture. And then on the right-hand side, we didn't do anything to that. There was no mulch, no oats, no anything, and that's kind of also a control. So the straw is a treatment, the oats are a treatment, and the bare dirt with nothing done at all is our control. Here's a close-up more of the depth that we planted with that ripper. So on the bottom of those rippers, it's a widened piece of metal on the bottom that kind of opens up a little furrow. So we basically go 3 or 4 inches down with that, and we follow right behind it. The ripper goes through, and we follow it with a bucket. At the research farm, the way we do it is we just get down on our hands and knees and start going every 6 inches and planting. But it was very efficient. We were just thrilled with how it worked for planting. And you can get these single shank rippers like this pretty reasonable, and it doesn't take a real big tractor at all to pull them. So here's a picture of the plots that we had, and you can see down the middle there's 5 different rows. Those are the rows that we planted in through across the treatments. And this picture is in the spring after you see the yard there starting to green up a little bit, but our oats have been winter killed, and that's kind of what the cover looks like. So once again, what we're trying to do, if you're large scale or small scale, this would be super easy for you to do. We were growing our own mulch that we no-tilled into, and then that provided our winter frost protection. And what we're looking at long-term is here, how does that affect weed control? And that's where we really don't have an idea to say it's working yet or not. One of the things we're going to change this year is we're going to change seeding rate of the oats again and see how that works. But that's some exciting work that's coming out of the research farm. That's a picture of the rows looking down through the 5 rows at the research plot. And here's a picture of a commercial producer that basically did the same thing, 30-inch rows into standing oak cover crop, and you can see a close-up on the bottom right of how that looks. Here's another close-up of one of the plots. This was the 2X rate. One thing that you'll note, and this is getting to be a problem all across Illinois and the Midwest, are winter annual weeds. This was early in the season. The yard, you can tell, is just barely starting to green up, and we've got some pretty significant winter annuals. And at least that plot at Monmouth was our major weed competitor for the year, was the winter annual. Another thing we're going to watch very closely is what rate do you have to have that it controls those winter annuals that are setting seed early in the spring and putting on reserves in the fall and really causing us some problems in the commercial side of things. And a lot of the home growers probably deal with these weeds too. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Watering, you basically don't need to do it. I was working with growers last year that didn't water their garlic at all and had really good garlic. It was a hard job to harvest everything because of the drought and how hard everything was. But you don't want to water the garlic. Just let it get whatever water is going to come from Mother Nature. Because garlic, it needs water, but you can really get into some problems with rotting and some other disease issues if you water that. You want to be very careful too. Sometimes people will water a little bit before they harvest to loosen the soil, and I'd really kind of recommend against that because you're going to end up harvesting a wet bulb, and that's one thing that you don't want because that'll make curing really hard to do. As far as pests goes, garlic basically will have the same pests as like onions. But we don't see a lot of problems with pests in garlic. The key to that is just make sure you rotate it. You don't want to have one of your plots in the field where you grow onions one year and garlic the next. You want to stay out of that allium family of crops to keep these pests under control. But most growers will tell you that's the beautiful things about garlic. There's not a lot of pest issues that you have to deal with. Some general management things here we can talk about. Just make sure that on those scapes, once again, they're forming in late spring. Make sure you get those cut off. If you don't, you'll reduce your bulb size by at least 20%. And we've seen an average of about 30% at the research farm with the work that we've done. You need to sell those products. You can harvest those the morning of to your CSA people or the morning of the farmer's market, and people will really look forward to when those scapes are going to come on because they've been waiting all year for some fresh garlic, and then they know a couple weeks later we're going to have garlic out of the field, so they're looking for that. As soon as they start to curl is when you need to cut them. That's a good picture right there. So we're going to move to harvest. I have worked with growers that have this system. If you're not familiar with a broad fork is basically a really heavy-handled, broad, wide, heavy pitchfork. And the idea behind it is you can sock that in the ground and you can put your weight into it and you pop up the bulb crops, potatoes, whatever you have with that. They work really well on a smaller scale. I don't think my back can handle using a broad fork on all that garlic there, but they're really useful product, and probably a lot of the commercial growers on here use it already. Well, the system that we're using, I have another picture of that ripper on there, and we just did this a couple weeks ago. We decided on advice from one of the growers that I work with, since we were on 40-inch rows, we took that same ripper. We got as close to the row as we could without damaging the bulb, and we ended up ripping down one side, and then we tried the next row. We ripped down both sides. It worked phenomenally. Bulbs, you just barely grab them to pop them out, and they came right out. A note on harvesting, don't ever try to harvest the garlic by just grabbing hold of the stalk and yanking out, because the only thing you're going to pull out is the stalk and you're going to leave the bulb in there. Garlic, it's not hard to harvest, but it's a sturdy plant. You want to make sure that you loosen that soil up somehow. But this has worked really well for us at the farm. Other ways commercially that people are harvesting, you can see some pictures here. These are basically potato diggers. The one on the right is kind of a neat system. It's got a little cutting blade that you set right underneath the bulbs, the depth of the bulb, and then it's on an angle, and as the bulbs come up through that, basically on those tines, it pulls the bulb up and gently bumps a little bit of the dirt off of it, and that's how you harvest them. But some other things about harvest. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine, and you'll understand why. Bulbs bruise very easily, so be really careful with them. When do you harvest? I have a note there that you harvest before the tops completely die down, because the plant is mature before those tops are completely dried up and fall over. You want to make sure you get them out of the soil at the right time so you don't subject them to any sort of disease issues or what have you. As a rule of thumb, if you just looked at a stem and said, when should I be harvesting? It's when about 4 to 6 green leaves are still attached to the top of it. We had some slides earlier you saw where the late June slides where the bottom leaves were dead and dying and the top were still green. That's a really good way. Go out there and harvest some of them to see what stage they are, because you can harvest and eat garlic earlier as green garlic. So just whatever you pull out, just use there at home and cook up. What do you do when you harvest? Well, you want to remove excess soil. When you cure these bulbs, you can kind of set yourself up for success or failure with some simple things that you do or don't do. Don't ever wash it. What you want to end up having done is you want all of that soil and everything on the outside skin of that bulb to basically dry and come off. And I'll have a picture here in a minute. A key thing, though, is like with any of the produce that we work with, commercial setting, you don't want to expose that to direct sunlight for any time period because it's going to heat up and cause some issues. So the picture on the bottom left, hopefully they're coming right back in there, picking that up and getting it to the shed for curing. And let's talk a little bit about curing. I'll have a picture on the next slide, but basically what you want to do is lay the whole plant on a screen or hang it in small batches to dry. If you're going to hang it, make sure it's a very small batch because you want as much air as you can possibly get going through those bulbs. Another thing about that is that you want to cure that with the stalk on. You don't want to harvest it and bring it to the shed and cut the stalk off. And one of the reasons for that is that stalk kind of acts like a wick and helps cure that bulb. So leave the stalks on for about 14 days. You want to make sure that it's in a well-ventilated room or area where they're getting a lot of airflow through there, because you're trying to pull out moisture, so air will help dissipate that, keep the sunlight off of it, and then constantly go in there and check for the rotting bulbs and make sure you get any of those out. And if you do see rotting in there, you're not getting enough airflow in between, so they may need spread out. A lot of growers I work with just use simple pallets. They put pallets like on a hay rack, and so there's air underneath the garlic, there's air over top, and they keep the shed doors open. And after about 14 days, roughly, is when you can remove the stalk, and you should be good with getting that product to store for a long time. So here's a couple that they're probably 2 weeks into curing, and you can see the stalk is dried up. The reason I told you not to wash it is you can see on that outside skin there's some dried dirt on that, and that's going to come off really easily with your hand, and later on. You don't need water to do that. And I think I actually have another slide here in a minute to show you that. So complete curing will take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. It varies a lot on environmental conditions and how good the conditions are where you're harvesting that. This is a really neat setup on the bottom right-hand side where they made basically rows like a wine glass holder, and each one of those, instead of wine glasses, we have garlic in there, and that's a really neat way to cure that, I thought. So after it's completely cured, you can get those cleaned up a little bit. You can trim the tops earlier than 4 to 6 weeks, but that outside dirty skin is what we're going to take off before we market it. A little about storage. Basically, you don't want the garlic to sprout, and it'll sprout most rapidly between 40 and 50 degrees, and you can see what the humidity is. The humidity for garlic is lower than most vegetables because high humidity in a root crop usually causes mold and decay. So the keys to storage and curing is a cool, dry, well-ventilated area. Here's the one I was waiting to get to. I have people ask me about cleaning garlic. You're not necessarily cleaning it, you're just removing field dirt. So you have a picture before, you've got some of that field dirt from the harvest, and product has been curing for, say, 14 days, and we cut the top off of the garlic, and then with a very simple 2-3 seconds, we take that outer skin off. That's one of the ways you know that it's cured, is that outside skin will come off very easily. It will start to peel away at the top, and if you just brush your hand across that, it's going to clean itself up. And on the right is the picture of the marketable product. That's a beautiful bulb of garlic there that consumers are really going to want to get a hold of. Variety. I mentioned it earlier. Just as an aside here, the variety that we use in all of our trials here is called Music, and Music is actually an heirloom variety. And the reason we use that is garlic has a lot of different flavor. You can get garlic that is extremely strong. You can get it that's very mild. And when you're a grower, you're not growing for one individual person and their taste and preference. So what you try to do is hit the middle of the road. And what growers have told me over the years, and their clients have told them, that this Music variety is one that just has really good garlic flavor. It's not overpowering, but it has good flavor. So it's a very popular one to grow. There's others, the University of Illinois trials in Champaign, Spanish Roja, Carpathian are other hardnecks that do well. But I would venture to say this Music variety is one that will produce across Illinois. And you can see here, I just took some data that Dr. Voigt in his variety trials in Champaign, the Music variety actually can top the production side of it too over the years. A lot of varieties out there, you can play around with it, but you might want to just keep with the tried and true in marketing these. There's a picture of a nice bowl of homegrown, locally grown garlic ready to be sold to farmers markets or direct to restaurants or to CSA clients. And like I said, people really look forward to the garlic coming on. They get excited to see it every year. Let's talk a little bit about marketing. As I mentioned when we started, garlic's becoming really popular for culinary reasons and medicinal. People are using fresh garlic in a number of ways. As we start to see some of our food culture and habits changing towards cooking with more fresh products, people are wanting to use garlic in their diets. Stacy had a good question. Do you cut the roots off after cleaning? You can trim them up. Most people don't cut them completely off. People just like to see those. For some reason, makes them feel good that it's got roots that came from Mother Earth and makes you feel better. So you can. It doesn't matter. As I said, Garlic's becoming one of those standard things like potatoes and tomatoes that almost everybody I work with is offering that. They know from year to year they may try a different variety of one of these products, but they know they're going to have the garlic and tomatoes and potatoes in their marketing. And as I mentioned earlier, that's really important too, because with those types of products, those bulb and storage crops, the same thing with shallots. Shallots are becoming really popular. You can market those to your clientele throughout the year, so you keep in constant contact with them. You don't have that time frame where you're not marketing anything to them. They like that product, and you can keep in touch with your clients. So in terms of small farm marketing, it's really a neat product to consider growing out there. Here's just kind of a random picture here. I think must be the one on the right was one of them that planted from a bulbil, I imagine. Not sure on that picture. New crop Chinese garlic, that's where most of our garlic comes from, hits the U.S. in mid-June. And a lot of that product is what's going to hit the grocery stores. And remember, they're selling soft-neck. That's a different type of product than what you're going to be selling. You're going to be selling the hard neck. So one of the things you want to do is sell the differentiation of that product. It's locally grown. If you choose a variety like music, I'm not saying to use music, you can if you want, but it's an heirloom, sell that to them. Tell them you're the grower. You can tell them how it was grown. I have a grower that does a really good job with garlic throughout the year, and she sends pictures, update on the garlic in her newsletters the growing season. One thing that you don't want to do is compete. As a small farm local grower, you're kind of niche marketing, so to speak. So you don't want to compete with the product that's coming from huge international companies that go to every grocery store across the United States. You're selling locally to your local stores, grocery stores, restaurants, what have you. Sell that differentiation of that product, that this product unique, it's high quality, was local, and that's how you sell garlic on local markets. So this is becoming very popular around the country a lot. And like I said, California, Gilroy, California, there is the garlic capital of the world. Garlic festivals. I've talked to people that have been to some of these garlic festivals in California and San Francisco and what have you, and they say it's quite an experience. I love the quote on the bottom there. A nickel will get you on the subway, but garlic will get you a seat. I want to use that one with growers. Is the next small farm garlic capital of the world Illinois? Might take a while, but we certainly have the growing conditions to do such, and it's a product that we've shown across the state of Illinois that grows well. It's easy to manage. You can become a very proficient grower of garlic in a year or so by learning some of the tricks of the trade. And hopefully some of the things that we've talked about today will help you get to that point. So what we're going to do now is I'll take any questions that you have. Leroy, a very poor stand, dry fall, wet spring. We had a wet spring here too in western Illinois. Our stand was really good. I wonder if you didn't get the root system development like you needed early in the fall. You might have got that planted, in the right time frame that we were talking about, but with the drought that we have, you might not have got the root system and might have caused issues later on. And I was talking with some of our people on campus about some of the virus issues in garlic, and they said it would be very site-specific, that there's no big issues with any viruses in garlic, at least here. Can you successfully grow garlic in high tunnels? Yeah, you can grow it very well. It doesn't prevent the chill requirement. Actually, I have one of my growers sitting here right next to me, has grown garlic in his high tunnel. Probably what you want to do is you're going to manage your high tunnel a little differently if you know you have something in there that has a chill requirement. And one way to do that actually is to plant it on the outside rows of the high tunnel, and then but don't expect too much. I mean, if you're going to try and keep some of these leafy greens like the spinach and bok choy and some of these things growing, you have two different environments. That's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but it can be grown very well in there. Just make sure you plant it on the outside edge so it's going to get as cold as it can get out there. Dr. Theory asks us, does garlic tolerate different kinds of soils? Yeah, it does, but I come back to just make sure that you're amending the soil with organic matter. It does really well with organic matter. Some of the considerations, I know James works in some areas in Kankakee that are sandy soils. They can be a little more trying. because of the water holding capacity of that soil. And if you are in a very sandy, if all you have to grow is a sandy soil, you're probably going to have to consider some sort of irrigation, drip irrigation system, because the water holding capacity of that sand isn't going to do well for garlic. Now, I said it's not going to do well. You can manage it and grow good garlic. It's just going to be different than what I would grow in Western Illinois. List of comparisons U of I test. Actually, what I'll do there, Dr. Franks, is I will send the link out. When you get the archive version of this, I'll send the link to the variety trials that we do in Illinois, and we'll take care of that for you. That's a good suggestion. Okay. Well, we got through several questions there. With 4 minutes to spare, I'd still take any questions that are out there. I'm going to take another drink here and see if there's any others. There we go. Okay, Holly's got the greatest soil in the world, so she must be in Illinois, right? I know we have some Iowa people on there, but 2-foot beds, 4 rows, 4 inches within a row. That's really tight, Holly. I think you're going to improve your quality significantly if you go. You got to have a little more spacing in between the plants. I wouldn't go much under a 6, and that's you're still going to get a lot of growth in there. I think you'll be glad that you did give a little more plant spacing. Does that make sense? Yeah, the general rule of thumb is, within your row, about 6 inches, your row spacing, you don't want to get much under a 6-inch there, but from there on out, it's basically what's going to work in your system. So, for instance, the trials that I did, if you remember in Monmouth, we were on 38-inch rows because of our equipment size. So that was a trade-off. If we do things a little different in research than you would a commercial setting, but there is a trade-off between how much you want to get a good density of product out there to grow, but there's a trade-off with commercial people that are using some of this mechanical stuff. The labor trade-off with the less product out there is a good trade-off from them. When do you loosen the soil with a broad fork? What they were doing with that in the pictures that I had was right at harvest. They weren't loosening the soil for any other reason other than to get the product out, the garlic out of the ground. So, a broad fork would be great to use before you planted, to break it up a week or two before you planted the garlic to get the soil broken up a little bit. But the picture I showed you was with them harvesting. That makes sense, Greg? How many horsepower to pull that ripper? That's a little tractor. I mean, the tractor we have it on is like a 30 horse. But remember, you're only going in, 4 or 5 inches. If you're going to use it to fracture the subsoil, you go in quite a bit and you need more horsepower. But we're only going in, we probably set it at 6 inches to end up with a 4-inch trench to plant in. So it doesn't take much at all. Now you can also, it's different too with commercial growers versus a home grower. You can go in there and just take, a trowel or something that you would use, a transplant trowel would work best. And you can dig your hole with that and you don't need to do anything to the soil. If I was in a garden setting, that's probably what I'd do, is just use my transplant trowel and just make the holes with that. Okay, I'm right at 1 o'clock. I'll stay on here with questions if anybody has any, but I like to start on time and finish on time, so I don't take any more of your time than I need to. You've got my email there. You can email me. Get to know, if you haven't met your extension educator in your community, be sure and do that. and they can help you out with things like this. But I'd be glad to talk to anybody about the trials or any of the work we're doing in garlic work or growing it commercially. And I hope everybody got some useful tidbit of information with the program today. Be looking for some information from us via email, and I hope to hear from you soon. And good luck putting your garlic in October. So everybody keep in touch. Thank you.